The desert doesn't have a sound. It's not silence, it's emptiness. Like the whole world is holding its breath, waiting for something that's never coming. He moved there on a late September afternoon. The heat still clung to the air, but the sunsets had already started shrinking quietly, almost shyly. The town didn't have a proper name on the map, just a faded dot lost somewhere in Arizona, wrapped in red dust, yucca plants, and forgotten memories. Folks around there called it Dry Creek, though he'd never once seen a creek in sight. The man wasn't young anymore. Calloused hands, quiet eyes, the face creased like cracked earth. He hadn't come to start over. He came to disappear. The house he rented sat at the end of a dirt road, far from the old post office, a faded wooden structure with a bent tin roof and tired walls. The whole town had maybe 10 homes left with people still living in them. The locals were quiet, polite enough, but no one ever spoke to each other after 7 p.m. He liked it that way. At his age, quiet wasn't loneliness, it was mercy. The first day passed without much to note. He unpacked his books, brewed a pot of bitter coffee, watched the sunset burn low behind the mesquite trees. Night falls fast in the desert. It doesn't settle in. It drops like someone flipped a switch. And then came the first night. Around midnight, he was sitting on a creaky rocking chair out on the porch when a breeze drifted in through the gaps in the door frame. It was suddenly cold, like something passed straight through his thinning skin. A soft click. Barely a sound, but in the dead stillness, it rang like a gunshot. He turned his head. The old mailbox by the road, the rusted metal kind, stamped with the number 21, was just closing. No car had gone by, no footsteps, just the moon hanging low and heavy like a tin kettle, and the distant insects that seemed to rise from under the earth. Slowly he stood. Each step toward the mailbox felt heavier than the last. His hand trembled, not from fear, but from something he couldn't name. Inside was a brown envelope, worn paper, slightly damp, no stamp, no return address. Just one line of handwriting, faint black ink. I never left this place, and I never forgave you. No name, just that. He stood there for a long time, eyes fixed on the sentence, as if he might find a clue buried in the curve of a letter or the drag of a pen stroke. But nothing. It was unfamiliar, and yet something about it felt too familiar. Back inside, he laid the envelope on the wooden table. Didn't open it again. There was nothing more to read, just that one line. But it stuck to his thoughts like a nail in old timber. And his dreams that night, they weren't soft like desert sand anymore. He didn't sleep, not out of fear, but because of the question left behind. Who knew he was here? Who still remembered him? And why? Why no forgiveness? The next day, he asked the woman who rented him the house, a thin, elderly lady who lived alone near the abandoned church. Does this town have a mail carrier? She looked at him for a long moment, weighing something. We do,
she said slowly, "but not on a schedule." He frowned. "Mail shows up when it's supposed to. You'll get used to it." Her answer left him further adrift in the fog. The less clear things became, the more he felt like someone or something was watching him from just beyond the edge of what's real. That night he sat on the porch again, not to enjoy the breeze, but to wait. 11:59 p.m. Nothing. 12:03 a.m. Still nothing. 12:17 a.m. An owl soared overhead, completely silent. Then 12:31. Click. Soft, precise, just like the night before. He sprang to his feet and hurried to the mailbox. This time there were 2 envelopes. Same paper, same ink. One was labeled, "This time, please read carefully." The other, it was empty. Not a word inside. He started keeping records, the exact times the letters arrived, the texture of the paper. He even tried sketching the handwriting in pencil, as if the answer might reveal itself in the pressure of a pen stroke. And slowly memories began to flicker back. A voice from long ago, a promise half made, someone he owed something to, a debt buried deep in the sands of time. 3 nights passed, 3 letters, each one with a single sentence. "I never left this place. This time, please read carefully. Not all doors are shut from the outside." By then, he understood. Someone wasn't just sending letters. Someone was trying to bring something back. Not just a person, but a whole piece of his past. At the end of part 1, he wrote a small note, his handwriting shaky. "I've forgotten too much, but if there's something I need to hear again, I'm ready." He placed it inside the mailbox at 11:59 p.m. Then he waited in silence. The desert wind slipped across the porch, and far off in the distance, the old church bell rang, even though it hadn't worked in years.
There are places that don't exist on maps, not because they're too small, but because people have chosen to forget them. Dry Creek was one of those places. No gas station, no school, no diner, just one little general store that sold cigarettes, coffee, bottled water, and an old wooden mail rack leaning against the counter like it had been waiting for someone who never came. The town sat in the middle of a cracked desert, down a red dirt road surrounded by scraggly yucca trees that looked like shadows frozen mid-prayer. On Google Maps, it only showed up if you zoomed in all the way, a nameless speck with no description. But for him, the newcomer, it was a stop that didn't need a reason. The town without daylight. One of the first things he noticed after a few days was that Dry Creek didn't seem to have daytime, at least not the way the rest of the world did. It never got fully dark, but it never quite lit up either. The sky was always stuck in a kinda dusty twilight, dim, silvery, tinged with a strange blue-gray. Whether it was 9 a.m. or 4 p.m., the air felt like it had just rained,
even though no rain had fallen there in years. The people were strange, too. No one walked outside during the morning. Windows were always shut, curtains always drawn. The streetlights only came on at night, but even the night was odd, more like a misty white than real darkness. He took walks each morning, out of habit at first. Later, to make sure, to see if anyone was watching him. Once or twice, he caught a curtain twitch, a shadow move behind a pane, but no one spoke, no one asked questions. This town seemed designed to keep people silent. The post office sat at the edge of town. It only opened at night, between 12:01 a.m. and 2 a.m. A small wooden shack with a tin roof and a faded sign missing half its letters. He tried going during the day once. The door was locked. Inside, total dark. No bell, no posted hours. One night, after receiving the fourth letter, he decided to visit. The door was open. Inside sat an elderly woman behind the counter, hair pulled into a neat bun, gray cardigan, round glasses. Her face wasn't cold, just the kind of face that had stopped being surprised by strange things a long time ago. She looked up at him and asked simply, "You're the new one?" He nodded, didn't say anything. She nodded back, reached under the counter and pulled out a brown paper parcel, placed it gently in front of him. Not all letters need a sender. Sometimes they just need someone left to remember. He didn't know what to say. He just nodded again, took the package, and turned to leave. Before he stepped outside, she added, soft as a breeze, "There are questions that don't need answers, but if you're planning to ask, wait until after the 7th night." Week 1. In that first week, he only saw 3 people. A man who sat motionless on a wooden bench outside the general store, never shifted, never spoke. A boy in a wide-brim hat who rode a scooter down a slope, then vanished behind a fence. A young woman with a scar running from ear to collarbone, sitting beside the abandoned church, staring at the sky without blinking. None of them greeted him. None of them turned their heads. It was like he'd already been there for years, and they were just letting him finish playing out his part. He had come to disappear. Now he found himself searching for something, though he didn't yet know what. The letters no longer frightened him. They reminded him of names, of laughter, of deaths he had tucked away deep in his memory. One letter brought back Eleanor, the first woman who had ever made him cry. Just one line. "I left my handkerchief in your coat pocket. Did you ever notice?" Another came from Will, the friend he'd left behind in the trenches. "The bullet didn't kill me right away, but I waited for you to come back until I couldn't hear anymore." The house he'd rented started to change, not physically, just the air. He began to hear faint footsteps overhead, though the house had no attic stairs. The sound of pages turning in the night, even though his books were always closed. It wasn't scary, just like forgotten memories were returning on their own terms. He started writing, not letters, not a journal, just scraps of paper, names, dates, pieces of old conversations. One night, he scribbled, "If I remember it wrong, will they forgive me?" By morning, the scrap was gone. In its place was an old photograph. Him, Eleanor, and a motorcycle. He'd never owned that picture. That's when he understood. This town wasn't just a town. It was a space where time folds in on itself. A place where the unforgiven, the unspoken, still wandered beneath the silver moon. The seventh night was coming, and he wasn't sure he was ready for what would be delivered next. But the mailbox was still there, waiting, patient, just one nod away.
His name was Eli. Not many people remembered that anymore, not even Eli himself. Years of wandering had left him with a trail of borrowed names: Hank, Red, Old Man. But only one person had ever whispered Eli into his ear like a lullaby soaked in sorrow. That was Eleanor. And on the seventh night, the seventh letter arrived, as if it had been waiting for years to find its way back to him. This time there was no envelope, just a single sheet of paper folded neatly and placed in the rusted mailbox. The handwriting trembled but was firm, like it had taken decades for each word to be written with perfect clarity. Remember that night at the edge of the woods when I told you if you turned your back I would die? You turned, and I did, but not in the way you think. Eli didn't remember it right away, but the words cracked open something inside him, a memory long buried beneath the years, the rain, an abandoned military outpost, a friend standing behind him with eyes wet like a child's, but a gun in his trembling hands. A friend. His name was Mason. That night, Eli hadn't fired his weapon. He had simply turned and walked away, leaving Mason alone with a decision no one should ever have to make. Eli lived. Mason vanished. And now it seemed Mason had written him, from a place where time no longer divided the living from the dead. A new letter every night. From that night on, a new letter appeared each evening, all from people Eli thought he'd left behind. Each sentence pierced through the armor he'd worn for so long and touched the part of him he thought no longer existed, his heart. One letter said only this: "Dad, I didn't blame you that day, but I cried the whole way home." No signature, but Eli knew. It was David, his son. He remembered that boy chasing after him the day Eli walked out, shoelaces untied, mouth struggling to form the words, "You'll come back, right?" And Eli, angry, tired, afraid, had just nodded vaguely and kept walking. David never saw him again. One night, colder than the rest, no wind, no moon, Eli opened the letter with hands that shook, not from age, but from knowing exactly who it would be from. "Eli,
I waited at the saloon for 2 hours, not out of anger, but hope. When you put too much faith in someone for too long, you become a fool. And I was a fool. But even now, if I had the choice, I'd still wait. Eleanor. Eli didn't finish reading. He folded the letter carefully, sat on the porch step, and lowered his head into his hands. For the first time in years, he wept. Not loudly, just a soft wind through the cracks kind of sound. He had told himself that leaving Eleanor was to protect her, to keep her from being dragged into the darkness of his life. But the truth was, he had left her alone in a kind of darkness she hadn't even seen coming. The town seemed to know he was remembering. Everything around him felt more alive, as if memory itself was repainting the walls, the floorboards, even the air. Passing the old church, he heard a faint melody, the same Sunday hymn Eleanor used to hum under her breath. Inside the general store, he saw a handkerchief on the shelf embroidered with a single letter, E. He didn't know if it was magic, hallucination, or guilt rebuilding the world in its own image, but he knew one thing for sure. The dead weren't gone. They were here, in the letters, in the wind, in the questions no one ever got the chance to ask. A different kind of message. One night, there was no letter, just a small wooden box in the mailbox and a note beside it. Not every sorrow needs to be written. Some things you have to remember by scent. Eli opened the box. Inside, a red fabric hair clip. Not new, not old, just familiar. The same one Eleanor used to wear when she rode behind him on that old motorcycle. He held it in his hand all night, said nothing, didn't close his eyes. He could smell the wind from that day again, her hair, sun-drenched air, and desert dust caught in a rush of memory. The more letters he received, the less afraid he became. They weren't accusations anymore. They were things never said, but needed to be heard. This town, Eli realized, wasn't a place of punishment. It was a place where the forgotten were given one last chance to speak and maybe be heard. The 13th night. The final letter in this part arrived on the 13th night, an unlucky number to many, but to Eli it felt like fate. If you're still listening, still remembering, still recognizing the lines of my handwriting, then you haven't given up hope. Don't write back. Come to the place where we last stood. I'll be there. D. Eli knew exactly where that was. The wooden fence beside the tiny cemetery. The place where Eli and David last saw each other, or more truthfully, failed to say goodbye. He put on his coat, wrapped a scarf around his neck, and stepped out. No flashlight, no weapon, just a letter in his pocket and a heart that for the first time in years beat like it belonged to a younger man.
Eli stood a long time by the wooden fence where the small cemetery lay still, like a wrinkle etched into the face of the earth.
The desert wind had worn down every slat of that fence, but he still recognized the spot where he once stood, where, more than 20 years ago, he had placed a hand on David's shoulder but couldn't find a single word to say. David had just stood there, silent, his eyes full of hurt and defiance, the look of a son who never understood why his father always chose to leave. Tonight, no one was waiting, just dry wind and slow curling dust, as if even time itself was hesitating. Eli sat down on the old step, pulled the letter from his coat pocket, and read it again, slowly, line by line. Then he closed his eyes. He wasn't waiting for a miracle. He was just waiting. He had lived so long in a state of flight that simply sitting still, opening his heart, felt like an unfamiliar act. The next night, there was no handwritten letter in the mailbox. Instead, a pristine white envelope waited inside, crisp, clean, and marked with handwriting so familiar it made his spine go cold. Eli held the envelope in both hands as if it were a piece of glass that might shatter. "Dad, I used to dream of you standing in the yard, looking in through my window, but never knocking on the door. I used to wonder, was it something I did wrong? Was I not good enough? But now I think I understand. You didn't knock because you were afraid if I opened the door, you'd see yourself shaking. You were never as strong as I thought you were. But I don't blame you anymore. If you're still listening, try knocking. This time, I'll open." Eli sat on the porch all night, the letter resting in his lap, hands clenched white around the edges. He didn't have tears left to cry, but something in his chest broke open, not out of pain, but because for the first time in a very long time, he felt what it was like to be forgiven. He didn't move right away the next morning. He sat quietly, listening to birdsong in the distance, a rare sound in Dry Creek. By noon, he went back inside and opened the old trunk in his bedroom. At the bottom were letters, unsent, yellowed, words he had written to David but never had the courage to send. He read them one last time, then he burned them out behind the house, not to forget, but to allow himself to let go. The next night, another letter arrived. No return name, not David's handwriting, just one line in blue ink. "Do you remember when I broke my arm at camp? You drove in from 2 states away. You didn't say anything. You just sat there and held my hand. I think I forgave you then, but I know you never forgave yourself." Eli stopped reading. He held the letter tight, afraid it might vanish in the wind. He looked out across the desert and whispered, "Son, how does a man like me learn to forgive himself?" There was no answer, but something softened in his chest, a new heartbeat, small and quiet, but steady enough to lift him to his feet. He placed the letter in an old picture frame beside a photo of David at age 10. The following day, he went to the post office. Mrs. Ellis still sat behind the counter, still as carved wood. "Sending anything out?" she asked, without looking up. Eli slid a small piece of paper across the counter. Not a letter, just a few lines. "David, I'm sorry. But more than that, I miss you." She took the note, tucked it into a drawer without a word. As Eli turned to leave, she spoke, her voice almost gentle. "Your boy's already been here, Eli. Not in the way you're used to, but he passed through this place. Those we speak of by name never really leave." On the 20th night, another letter arrived. No return name, not David's handwriting, just one line in blue ink. "Meet me at midnight behind the abandoned church. Bring what you've never said out loud." Eli knew it was time to say what he had never been able to say, not even to himself. He wrote it on a scrap of paper, hand shaken, ink slightly smudged. "I was afraid to be a father, because I never knew what a father was." He folded it, slid it into his pocket, and left the house at exactly 11:45 p.m. Behind the church, there was no one, just a headwind rising from the desert and a wooden cross leaning slightly in the dirt. Eli stood still, then bent down and placed the paper at the foot of the cross. Then he looked up, and for the first time, the full moon shone bright, as if the night had never known darkness. No voice, no footsteps, but he could feel it clearly. Someone was standing with him, not beside him, but within him. A space that had been empty for a lifetime was no longer empty.
Eli had always thought the town's mailman was nothing more than a figment, some imagined shadow, or a part of memory looping back on itself. But on the 21st night, he saw him for real. Not in a letter, with his own eyes. It happened just after midnight. Eli had gone outside later than usual, planning to sit under the porch roof like every other night, when he heard the crunch of gravel at the end of the road. He thought someone was leading a horse, but there were no hooves, no animal breath, just footsteps and the creak of wooden wheels. Then he saw him. A man was pushing an old-fashioned mail cart down the dusty road. He wore a faded postal uniform, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, face hidden in shadow. He didn't move fast. Every 3 houses he stopped, dropped something into a mailbox. No flashlight, no addresses, just knowing. Eli stood up abruptly, heart pounding, not out of fear, but because the man hadn't changed. He looked exactly the same as Eli remembered from 1965. Not older, not altered. That posture, that hat, that slow, deliberate walk, like time had simply forgotten him. Eli called out, "Hey, sir?" The mailman stopped, but didn't turn around.
just stood still. Eli walked toward him slowly, trembling like the night he got the telegram about his father's death. "Are you the one who's been sending all those letters?" His voice was barely a whisper. The mailman stood in silence for a long time. Then, without turning, he spoke, his voice dry and flat, like wind scraping over stone. "I didn't send anything. I carry things there, and I carry them back. I don't choose the words. I just deliver them." Eli swallowed hard. Something in that answer sank into his chest, like the sting of an old song you once wrote and forgot. He reached out, wanting to touch the man's shoulder, but before his fingers could land, the mailman was gone. No smoke, no flash of light, just gone. The mail cart vanished too. Only one thing remained, a single letter lying beside the road, brown envelope, red ink. Eli picked it up. On the front was one line: "The mailman never grows old because memory never dies." Eli walked home, hands trembling. He didn't open the letter. He didn't need to, because by then he understood every letter he'd received was either from someone who had died or from a part of himself he had never buried. The mailman didn't carry messages from others. He brought back unsaid words, unforgiven sins, unspoken love. The next morning, Eli walked to the small cemetery. On a patch of dry ground beneath a moss-covered headstone, he saw the name of someone he had once loved like family. Mason Harper, 1937 to 1969. A best friend, a brother in arms, the man Eli had turned his back on in a forest full of gunfire. Eli sat in front of the grave and placed the still unopened letter on the dirt. The wind blew strong, but the letter didn't move. It only fluttered gently, as if waiting to be read by the soul resting beneath. That night, Eli saw the mailman again, not walking the road this time. He stood at the foot of Eli's porch steps. No shadow, no breeze, just presence. Eli wasn't afraid. He looked the man in the eye and asked, "What are you?" The mailman didn't smile, didn't frown. He simply said, "I am what every soul leaves behind. I don't come to answer. I come to make sure what was left unsaid reaches where it needs to go." Eli nodded. His eyes welled. He understood. The mailman turned and walked into the desert. No sound, no footprints. But as he disappeared, Eli noticed something he had never seen before. Etched into the bottom of the man's left boot, tiny, sharp, in steel. Property of Dry Creek. There are people you meet only once, but never forget. Eli saw him on a night when the moon looked broken, not full like the night before, but like someone had taken a bite out of it. He was standing at the edge of town, where the red dirt road bled into the darkness of the desert. He wore a wide-brimmed black hat, the kind old cowboys wear at funerals. Eli didn't know why he stepped outside that night. There was no letter, no voice calling, just something inside him that stirred, a question so old it wanted to hear itself asked again. The man in the hat didn't move. He just stood there, facing away. His shadow stretched long across the ground, longer than his own body, like the moon was casting him under a different law of light. Eli didn't call out, didn't step forward. He just stood there too. After a while, the man turned his head slightly, not a full turn, more like a tilt, and Eli caught the edge of his face. That jaw, those cheekbones, not an exact match, but close, like someone had taken Eli's face, erased the years, scrubbed off the pain, and redrew it colder. The man raised his hand slowly and pointed down the road leading out of town. No words, just a gesture. Eli didn't move. A wave of hot wind swept through the desert, lifting a thin layer of dust. In it, footprints appeared, clear and distinct, headed toward that road. But not the man's footprints. They were Eli's. He looked down, then looked up. The man was gone. The next morning, Eli rose early. He walked to the edge of town where the man had stood. There was nothing there. No footprints, no heel marks, only a faint scratch on the rock, like someone had etched a line with a knife, marking a place, a moment. Eli stood there a long time, not thinking, not grieving, just a strange feeling. Maybe he had never really arrived in Dry Creek, or maybe Dry Creek had never left him. In the nights that followed, Eli still received mail, but no more handwritten letters. Now it was small objects, a rusted coin with his name etched in, a lighter struck by lightning once, and a dog tag from a war he'd never served in. Things that shouldn't exist. One night, he received a map. Dry Creek was no longer a smudge. It was marked in bold with a red ink note beside it. Where it starts, where it ends, no one leaves alone. One windless afternoon, Eli visited the post office. Mrs. Ellis was gone. The door hung open. Inside, the furniture was covered in thick dust, like no one had stepped in for years. He called out. No answer. On the counter sat an old photograph. The man in the black hat sitting beside a younger Eli, bearded, bright-eyed, a field in the background. He'd never seen that photo before, but he wasn't surprised. That night, the mailman didn't come. There was no letter in the mailbox, only a small mirror cracked across the surface, resting quietly inside. He looked into it and saw the man in the black hat standing behind him. He turned around. No one was there. After that, Dry Creek began to change. The town lost its shape, like a memory being erased. Houses faded, doors closed for good, grass pushed up between cracks in the street. One morning, Eli walked out and found the cemetery gone. The space was now smooth sand, no stones, no fences, no plastic flowers. He didn't panic. He just felt like things were finally dissolving the same way they'd once appeared, without words, without reason. A week later, the letters stopped. Eli sat on the porch steps, eyes on the road leading out of town. Above him, the moon was broken again. The wind rose. He heard the sound of wheels rolling over gravel. He didn't look back. That night, his house was empty. No signs of struggle, nothing disturbed. Just a single scrap of paper taped to the front door. No words, only a red ink stamp in the shape of a cowboy hat. The wind changed direction in the fourth week. Not a new wind, just the old one blowing a different way. Less dust, more of that scent of damp earth. It was as if Dry Creek had started breathing again, softer, slower. The townsfolk, those with no clear names, no clear homes, no clear proof they'd ever truly existed, began stepping outside more often. They walked slowly along the red dirt road, saying nothing, offering each other small nods in passing. A child hung a scooter from the fence. An old woman swept her yard with a handleless brush. A man read a newspaper so worn the letters had faded into shadows. No one mentioned Eli. But inside the post office, one wooden chair was wiped clean each day. On it sat a handkerchief embroidered with the letter E, an unsealed letter, and a pencil worn down to the nub. The mailman never returned, or if he did, no one saw him anymore. Still, at the stroke of midnight, each mailbox in town would hold something small, a button, a blurry photograph, a length of old rope, as if someone somewhere was quietly gathering forgotten pieces of memory and returning them to their rightful owners. One late afternoon, a stranger passed through town. No name, no questions. He stopped by the general store and while reaching for a pack of dusty cigarettes, found a letter tucked in between the shelves. No addressee, no stamp, just one line written in purple ink. If you ever missed something, Dry Creek will wait until you're ready to come back. The stranger slipped the letter into his pocket, nodded to the shopkeeper, and kept walking. Not toward anywhere, not away from anything, just walking. That year it rained at the end of the season. Not heavy, not loud, just a soft patter against tin rooftops, like the quiet sigh of someone who had been silent for too long. The yucca plants along the roadside sprouted new buds. The church door creaked open in the wind, revealing a room awash in moonlight. On the wall, no one knew when it appeared, was a single line of chalk, faint, white, as if written on a very still night. I didn't come back, but I never really left. They say if you pass through Dry Creek around 1 a.m. when the moon is low, and you stop by the old cemetery, you might hear a man clear his throat, pull up a wooden chair, and quietly read a letter. You won't see him, but you'll hear the pages turning, the click of a lighter, and every now and then the softest laugh, like someone had finally forgiven himself after a lifetime of not knowing how. One day grass grew over the land where Eli's house used to stand. No one remembered what the house looked like, how many windows it had, whether it had a porch or not. But strangely enough, people still nodded as they passed, as if they believed, or wanted to believe, that Eli was still there, sitting quiet with his hat low, a cup of cold coffee in hand, watching the desert without needing to say a word. No words needed. Inside the post office, on a small table, a single photo remains. The image is blurred, just a man in a hat sitting beside a boy, both looking toward the sunrise, both silent, but neither alone. One night in September, when the air was neither hot nor cold, someone heard footsteps on the red dirt road of Dry Creek. Slow, steady, light, like someone walking without leaving a trace. No one saw the person, but the chair on Eli's porch creaked back and forth without wind, and the old wooden cup on the table had water in it, warm but not steaming. If someone were to ask, where did Eli go? The folks in town would usually just smile. No answers, no guesses. Because in a place like Dry Creek, sometimes leaving and staying are the same thing. There's something most people don't notice. The last letter ever placed in the mailbox didn't have any writing on it, just a blank sheet of paper. But everyone who looked at it believed it was written for them. The widow at the end of town saw a line that said, "I still remember you, every morning that smells like cornbread." The young man read, "Don't be afraid to grow up. Your wounds will learn how to talk to each other." And the little girl, just learning to read, saw no words at all, only felt warmth. And that night, she didn't wake up crying. Eli used to think that the things we never say follow us to the grave. Now he knows they don't go anywhere. They sit quietly at the edge of our bed as we grow older. They become the sound of wind slipping through old wood, the dust on your sleeve, the creak of a step you forgot the reason for. Tonight, someone knocks at your door. Not loud, not rushed, just once, then silence. If you don't open, the sound won't come again. No one will be angry. No one will leave. It'll just wait somewhere until you're quiet enough to come meet it. But if you open the door, you might not see anyone. Just a small piece of paper resting on the porch step. You're not alone. You're just listening to a part of yourself you once hid away. Dry Creek isn't on the map, but sometimes when you're tired, you'll dream your way there. quiet little town no one arrives at without carrying a past. A place that doesn't ask who you are or what you've done, just invites you to sit, pours you a cup of warm water, and says, "Let the unfinished things sleep a little longer." The night ends, and the storyteller goes quiet. Not because there's nothing left to say, but because what remains can only be heard by a heart at rest. Go to sleep now. Dry Creek is still there. And if one day you need to send a letter but don't know where to send it, just tuck it beneath your pillow. The mailman knows the way, and Eli is still listening.